All right, so. Good evening. Welcome to the third FAST lecture of the 2020-2021 academic year. My name is Buck Robertson, and I am this year's Assistant FAST Coordinator. For those of you new to the University of Michigan Archaeological Community, FAST is the Field Archaeology series on Thursday. Every month, FAST features a public-facing lecture presenting the latest in archaeological research from University of Michigan students, faculty, and researchers, and some non-Michigan affiliated scholars. FAST is generously supported by the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology, the Department of Classical Studies, and the Interdepartmental Program in Classical Art and Archaeology. But FAST is ultimately made possible by an eager and engaged audience and world-class speakers. So thanks to all of you for your attendance this evening and continued participation in our intellectual community. I'll ask that you please hold your questions for our speaker until the end of the talk. If you're worried about forgetting your question, you may type it into the chat and I can read it out when it is time for Q&A. As per proper Zoom etiquette, I would ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking during the Q&A. The actual presentations and this introduction is being recorded, while the Q&A portion will not. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Christiane Gruber, professor and chair of the History of Art Department. She received her BA from Princeton University and earned her MA in Islamic architecture and her PhD in Islamic art history from the University of Pennsylvania. Her primary field of research is Islamic book arts, paintings of the Prophet Muhammad, and Islamic ascension texts and images, about which she has written 2 books and edited a volume of articles. She also pursues research in Islamic book arts and codicology, and modern Islamic visual culture and post-revolutionary Iranian visual and material cultures. She recently completed her 3rd book, titled The Praiseworthy One, The Prophet Muhammad in Islamic Texts and Images. Her lecture this evening is titled In That They Only Live by Cliques, Digging Below the Surface of Archaeological Photography at Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi, and she will be sharing some of her recent research about the excavation of the site of Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi in Syria. Okay.
Thank you so much, Buck. Let me just share my screen before I continue. Does everybody see this?
You can see it.
Yep.
Fantastic, thank you. So thank you for inviting me to give this talk today. It's a real pleasure to be here. Some of you have seen our PhD student, Michelle Affairsley, give a couple talks on this topic. And the first thing I want to do is acknowledge her here because the moment she came for an interview on campus, I said to her, you really need to dig into the archives of al-Hayr Gruber at the Kelsey Museum. I think there's at least an article in there. And lo and behold, for the last few years, she sifted through thousands of documents and photographs. And so we decided to join forces and publish a book that should be out sometime in 2021. Michelle has written the most substantial historical and scholarly essay for that catalog. We wrote 50 entries for 50 photographs that we selected. And I decided to write a short, sort of snappy piece trying to understand what's sort of hiding beneath archaeological photography in light of the archives, but also sustained interviews with my own advisor, Renata Hullett, who was part of this dig. So keep your eyes open. This will be a publication sometime in 2021. So without further ado, let me head into the talk itself. In 1964, al-Hayr Gruber prepared for his first season of archaeological excavation at Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi, an Umayyad period urban settlement located in the semi-arid Syrian steppe known as the Badia. He had identified this 8th century site during an exploratory campaign in the Middle East that was organized by George Forsyth, then director of the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology at the University of Michigan. As a young professor of Islamic art at Michigan, Gruber turned to Forsyth for help in securing logistical support and financial resources under the museum's sponsorship. Although Gruber personally identified and recruited members of his excavation team, the eventual hire of an official archaeological photographer was prompted by Forsyth, who considered the museum's photographer Fred Underegg, who died in 2011, as ideal for the task. Fred, or Fredo, as he was affectionately known, had earned Forsyth's esteem for his photographic work at the Michigan-Princeton expeditions at the monastery of St. Catherine's in the Sinai a few years prior. Adding to his international renown, Underegg's photographs of the icons and mosaics of the Eastern Orthodox Church complex were published that very same year in the National Geographic's special issue dedicated to Mount Sinai. Gruber, however, responded to Forsyth's suggestion with initial reluctance, stating, quote, "About the photographer, I don't feel as strongly as you do on Fredo, because I'm not as excited about beautiful photographs as the whole department knows by now. We can always rely on intellectual reconstructions if the photography is mediocre, but I simply don't have the money for a good photographer and don't want to use up what I have. Photographers are a curious race as artists in that they only live by clicks." End quote. Gruber's lukewarm response points to several interlinked concerns. Besides his financial worry about the cost of photography, which rises exponentially with every click of the camera, the biggest anxiety detectable here is what we might call the problem of the pretty, namely that an object of pulchritude cannot be an object of intellection. This attractiveness stereotype, wherein an aesthetically pleasurable item or image is deemed unsatisfactory at the cerebral level, was not limited to Gruber, however. Going back to the 1950s, scholarly debates unfolded on how an archaeological photograph produced in a scientific context could also manifest artistic and aesthetically pleasing qualities thanks to compositional balance and centering, leading lines, tonal and textural effects, and the use of filters. Positing truth against artistry, Gruber, like so many archaeologists of his generation, worried about the loss of informational accuracy and analytical rigor to the lure of the pretty. And yet, Underegg indeed joined the al-Hayr team. I'm sure he was convinced by Forsyth here, shooting thousands of photographs of the excavation, its structural features and remains, and its small finds such as ceramics and coins. So here you see a coin, the team, the site, Palmyra, and the dig house with my former PhD advisor, Renata Hollid, right here. These photos display technical skill and they are informational in their contents. Sometimes they also happen to be beautiful, evocative, or even eerie. Not limiting himself to archaeological photography alone, Underegg also took many shots of Gruber and his colleagues at work and rest, engaging professionally and socially with Syrian colleagues and field personnel, and embarking on road trips, including to nearby Palmyra, or Tadmur in Arabic. His photos transcend a purely machinic eye, to borrow Michael Shank's expression, to reveal his deep interest in the humans living and laboring at the site, forging friendships, and solving logistical and intellectual challenges along the way. His voracious photographic activity thus provides us with a visual record of life on the dig, acting as both archive and witness to an archaeological moment of encounter between a historical past and a lived present. Underegg's photographic oeuvre activates multiple historical stratigraphies. His black and white photographs carry the evidentiary force deemed necessary for the type of archaeology that by the mid-20th century was considered processual and therefore more objective. Based on scientific data, engaged with model testing, and propelled by deductive argumentation and logic-based conclusion, processual archaeology of the 1960s replaced the Orientalist antiquarian endeavors of old. Conversely, Some of Andreg's more informal snapshots of the Qasr al-Hayr team are gleefully subjective, propelling us into an emotive rather than academic field. Whether evidentiary or subjective, taken all together, these photographs of the site, its buildings, and its people offer a reminder that archaeological photographs are, quote unquote, as much about the diggers as things dug, to quote Frederick Bohr. The Qasr al-Hayr photographic corpus at the Kelsey Museum acts above all as an archaeological site per se. It preserves in material and visual form the remains of places and people both come and gone. Such photographs capture what is often left unrecorded and unspoken. Yet looming behind each shot is a story, a thought, an emotion, a conversation, a labor, a laugh, and even a strand of hair cut and strewn to the wind. Such ephemeral acts, exchanges, and instants cannot be severed from the scientific process itself. In addition, beyond the photographic image, focusing the lens on this human element of archaeological work must rely on participant interviews as well. For these reasons, my talk this evening will weave into its narrative the voice of Renata Holland, Professor Emerita at the University of Pennsylvania, a former PhD student of al-Hayr Gruber, a key member of the team at Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi, and last but not least, my very own Dr. Mutter. Her explanations of life and work on the dig and of what we see, and just as importantly, what we don't see, captured in the photographs, enable a fuller understanding of scientific processes and tools, work logistics and environment, and general living conditions at Qasr al-Hayr from 1964 to 1971. While this type of photoethnographic reconstruction does not offer a remedy to the destructive character of archaeological work, it nevertheless can re-enliven a historical landscape in Syria that remains largely beyond our reach today. So let's turn to the photographs. Fred Underegg was considered by some a genius with film. Obsessed with achieving the highest possible quality in terms of clarity of composition and tonal balance, he erred on the side of excessive quantity. He was not just a shutter-happy cameraman, however. His ultimate aim consisted in capturing those rare and precious photographic diamonds in the rough, so he did not hesitate to discard shots that he considered less than perfect or even substandard. Lacking a penchant for hoarding, photos that he deemed not crisp enough were swiftly cast aside as mere fuzzy graphs, as he called them. Underegg himself admitted in 1971, after years of experience on the ground, that he disliked quote-unquote mushy images, and it is for this reason that he preferred the Nikon over the Leica camera. Besides proper technological equipment, Underegg understood that the best moments for site photography were the early morning and late afternoon, at which time the rising and setting sun's raking light illuminates the contours of sculptural ornamentation and architectonic details, as well as the topography of the surrounding landscape. When not endeavoring outdoors, he also kept busy shooting photographs of the excavation's small finds and developing film in a dark room on site. His tools and strategies can be detected in numerous photographs, including of the dig's small finds. For instance, he arranged ceramic sherds artfully in an arch formation, for example, their curvatures adding depth and dimension to the composition, as you can see here on the right. So we've got a nice curvaceous composition here. The fragments' edge are chiseled and their angles sharp. Underegg's calculated emphasis on these jagged diagonals endows the photographs with a materially propelled form of dynamism. The luminescence of the objects and their painted decoration are likewise accentuated thanks to a strong light and black background. This sharp, somewhat ethereal luster is a hallmark technique in the field of art photography, as is an emphasis on the pellucid, aeriform outline of glass rims, which you can see here on the left. So he's almost looking at these fragments of glass as if they were propellers on an airplane. From ceramics to glasswares, Underegg achieved dazzling visual effects thanks to a very simple implement, namely affordable, foldable background outfitted with dark fabric on one side and foil to catch the light on the other. His artful do-it-yourself pragmatism no doubt compensated for the limited resources that were available at Qasr al-Hayr. Beyond these aesthetic concerns, Underegg's photographs at the excavation had to convey scientific information, above all the accurate size of buildings and objects. As can be seen in the photograph of ceramic sherds on the right, and also of the glass sherds or fragments on the left, an unfurled tape measure in the foreground offers a relative scale in centimeters right here. This graduated device embedded within the photograph in turn could confirm or correct data recorded in the dig's written archives and published reports. Underegg's aesthetic mise-en-scène yielded a photo assemblage that bolstered an objective correlative, an integrated praxis that quieted Gruber's initial contrariness that posited beauty against truth. Besides the measuring tape, between 1950 and 1980, the rod scale served as a material stand-in for the professionalized discipline of archaeology. This object symbol engaged in a scientific visual aesthetics, in part precipitated by four key publications of the 1950s and 1960s. These included Cooksen's Photography in Archaeology of 1951, his Photography for Archaeologists a few years later in 1954, Matthew's book on photography in archaeology and art in 1968, and finally Simon's Archaeological Photography in 1969. Writing in 1954, Cooksen, in particular, encouraged excavation teams to hire professional, as site photography, he said, is a full-time task for one person who must record scientific evidence in the most clean, uncluttered, and organized fashion possible. As he took on duties as Qasr al-Hayr's full-time photographer, Underegg no doubt was familiar with contemporary discourses about both archaeology and photography, two interconnected fields that Simons described in 1969 as, quote, siblings that grew together. Indeed, as techniques in the former developed, more and better photography has been demanded, and better photography has contributed to improved archaeology, end quote. Such photo-archaeological endeavors were nothing if not co-emergent and co-constitutive. As Underegg's photographic work at Qasr al-Hayr evolved, so too did the team's interpretation of the site. For example, many of the ceramic water pipes suggested a complex underground system that transported water throughout the site, especially in the area that's known as the large enclosure. In his photographs of these pipes, Underegg arranged the requisite measuring sticks and rod scales as new scientific methods dictated. However, in selecting his lighting source, he often opted for raking sunlight in order to draw attention to the pipe's deep grooves, which, depending on their lateral or longitudinal layout, could either slow down or accelerate water flow. So here you can see the emphasis on the grooves. In addition, shadows cast in such light could stress empty areas, including the round hole in the pipe here shown on the left. This hollow element, emphasized via shadow relief, could help formulate hypotheses or raise questions, including why some pipe openings were filled with ceramic plugs. While a clear answer still remains elusive, the photographic data can offer a reliable reservoir of information for posterity. As the rod scale became an integral feature in the visual grammar of archaeological illustration, the human body and intellect continued to tend to the task of uncovering historical materials and inferring meaning from evidence. On the one hand, the insistence on individual presence and labor reasserts archaeology as a social science and humanistic discipline. On the other, it helps to animate the scientific process, which is itself populated by many actors, from scholars to workmen, cooks, and drivers. Oftentimes in his photographs, Underegg emphatically asserts the centrality of the human being above and beyond the rod scale. Not merely stick figures falling into line, the protagonists in these so-called scientific images have tales to tell, inviting both participation and alienation in our own lives and those of others, to borrow Susan Sontag's expression. This feeling of intimacy betrays an impenetrable distance, leading us to wonder what has become of the workmen of Qasr al-Hayr, who wore checkerboard kufiyas on their heads to protect themselves from the desert sun. How did they experience the excavation, and are they or their children still alive in Syria today? And how could their memories of the dig variegate the authoritative narratives put forth by scholars and a photographic corpus that, in its own alienated form of participation, retains hints of their past lives? While their voices and memories are sadly not available to us at the present moment, it is to their daily lives and loves that we turn next. The Qasr al-Hayr scholars and excavators are quite well known, their publications leaving a track record and their epistolary acts suffusing the archival record. The local Syrian workmen, however, prove an entirely different story. As is often the case with history told from above, their experiences and viewpoints have largely passed unnoticed. Offering somewhat of a corrective, Underegg's photographs provide us a grassroots visual history thanks to his keen interest in portrait photography. Indeed, it appears that he was especially drawn to field personnel, while recollections of their particular communities and characters are preserved by team members such as Renata Holland. Conjoining memory with photography in a duo that we might call the Menno photo can prove one means of telling world histories from below, of capturing a life world by slightly skirting a top-down account. In regards to Qasr al-Hayr and other excavation practices, Menno photos reveal that archaeology is not just about the past, but it is as much about the people, ideas, and networks which allow the past to be recovered. In other words, these photos provide an alternative terrain for excavation and reimagination. While a handwritten note from the 1971 season records the workmen of Qasr al-Hayr as numbering around 50, Holland recalls as many as 150 individuals active on the ground at any given moment. These varying numbers suggest that the workforce could grow and contract over the years. Some of the workers commuted from the nearby towns of al-Tayyiba, al-Sukhna, and Tadmur, which is the modern town of Palmyra, all three very close to Qasr al-Hayr, here in the Badia. Other workers also included the camel-herding Bedouins, or Bedu, of the Sabah tribe, who migrated for summer pastures across the Euphrates River. While the latter lived close to the site in temporary tents, the village of al-Tayyiba, whose name means the good one or water source, was home to recently settled, well-nourished men. Of larger and stronger disposition than the transhuman Bedu, the Bedouins, they served as the site's pickmen. This line of work required muscle power and attention to detail so as to not destroy important elements uncovered at the excavation site. For their part, the Sabah Bedouins were tasked with various duties, such as removing debris, transporting supplies, and holding measuring rods for Underegg's site photography. They thus were not as well remunerated as the more able-bodied locals from Tayyiba, As-Sukhna, and Tadmur. Despite this hierarchical division of labor, the Bedouin, local villagers, and foreign scholars often shared responsibilities, and they also shared food and good times. Other moments at the excavation are captured in Andrej's photographs, among them the ringing in of the workday and celebrations of payday. Packing a bang, these impromptu photographs capture the emotion of joy as well as the dynamism of sound. As they channel exclamations of the human voice, the stomping of feet in the desert sand, and the clanging of work tools, they capture an entire archaeosensorium, a soundscape that forms an indelible yet often overlooked element of work on the ground. Beyond their obvious uses for digging, carrying, and cleaning, workers' tools functioned also as heraldic devices of sorts. Many of Andrej's photographs capture men with their implements as if they were coat of arms, or at least objects of individual expression. So here we see a worker with his rod scale and several workers posing for the camera with a pickaxe and here with a broom. And this young man is made to stand up in somewhat risible but proper fashion. In some ways, these objects symbolically replace the swords, knives, and rifles of the Bedou who had been disarmed during the French occupation of Syria. By the 1960s, many of the excavation's workmen were first-generation, recently settled Bedouins whose power and independence in the steppe became increasingly curtailed under the independent Syrian Republic and later the Ba'athist regime. Working at the excavation site allowed them to earn income to carry on living as a community in the wake of the country's development-induced displacement that threatened their traditional livelihoods and desert cultures. When one looks back at Qasr al-Hayr with the clarity of time elapsed, it therefore becomes clear that the dig catalyzed a seasonal place of settlement for the Saba tribesmen at a critical moment in their history. In other words, I like to think of Qasr al-Hayr as an archaeological site also for tracing Bedouin life as the top stratum. Among the workmen, one individual reigns supreme in the team members' memories and in the Kelsey Museum's photographic archives. That individual is Qaidi, whose name means born in the middle of the summer, or Qaid. Measuring less than 5 feet in length, the diminutive Qaidi was hired as the expedition house guardian, but he also tended to various odds and ends, including cleaning ceramic sherds and holding measuring rods when the need arose. And here is Qaidi holding the measuring rod. He was loved by many on the site, especially Oleg Grabar and Renata Khalid, who were able to communicate with him in Levantine Arabic, Shami. So here is Renata Khalid in red. And here is Oleg Grabar. Here is Qaidi. In addition, Khalid al-Assad, a former director of the Palmyra Museum, who was unfortunately assassinated by ISIS in 2015, and here he is right there, was particularly fond and protective of Qaidi due to Qaidi having been orphaned as a child. He was so cherished for his consistent presence, charm, and sense of humor that Khalid, in our interviews with her, refers to Qaidi as the excavation's mascot. When not tending to his duties, Qaidi passed the days by singing Bedouin songs and praying towards Mecca. For the latter, he built a mihrab, or a niche, prayer niche, with stones that he gathered on site. With no permanent mosque structure nearby, he turned his own self and Qasr al-Hayr's archaeological remains into a makeshift prayer edifice. The soil under his feet acted as a masjid, as a mosque, on terra firma, a place of prostration that in this case and others occurring outdoors or in a natural environment, embodies the Prophet Muhammad's statement that, quote unquote, all the earth is a mosque. As for his songs, they grew in number and expanded in content to include serenades composed for Renata Holland, with whom he had fallen in love and whom he called Nara. Renata Holland gave us permission to talk about this. So he called her Nara based on a mispronunciation, an American Midwestern mispronunciation of her Ukrainian name. It's Renata, but here in the Midwest, you'll hear Renata. So he heard Nara, and so he would sing songs that went like this: Ya Nara inte hilwi, O Nara, you're beautiful. In retrospect, Khalid has expressed sadness that the Badawi tunes sung by Qaidi and the Qasr al-Hayr workmen were not at all recorded. As in other nomadic, steppe, and desert-dwelling cultures, these songs preserved a rich and ever-evolving oral tradition that has largely disappeared today. These prayers, loves, and songs inspirited the excavating experience, leaving memory traces in individuals until the present day. Without photographic hints and ethnographic work, such life worlds remain secreted away in archival folders or else are left to linger in the fields of the forgotten. In some ways, the workers' contributions provide the uppermost stratum of the Qasr al-Hayr excavation. Rather than pushing it aside, in a move that echoes in decades prior the clearing of Islamic levels of occupation at Greco-Roman sites throughout the Middle East, this stratum is worth exploring, so we should pause and take stock of what happened on the ground. The dig was nothing if not tough, grueling work. The late spring and early summer desert sun scorched the body, the sand abraded skin, the dust irritated eyes. Carrying large debris required brawn and energy, and water was hard to come by. In point of fact, the contaminated water caused an outbreak of hepatitis during the second season, while amoebic dysentery regularly broke out among team members, including Renata Holland. Besides the elements, some of the fauna also proved relatively inhospitable. One time, Holland recalls, Gruber was bitten by a scorpion on the sole of his heel. The callus thickened by days of toiling in subpar footwear, providing him with the only available antidote to the arachnid's venom. Other animals also resided on site. For example, a Bedouin workman caught a falcon that was roosting in one of the towers and then trained it for the hunt, while another workman, wearing protective goggles that he removed while taking a cigarette break, found a bunny and cradled it in his hands for Andreg's camera. Here is his cigarette, which is awfully close to the little bunny, and here are his goggles that he lifted up for a brief moment. Here, one imagines that the baby animal was extracted from its burrow as if a delightful archaeological find. The workmen sweated through thick and thin, including removing heavy stones and other debris that they transported away from the site with a dump truck. Standing in line formation, known as a saf in Arabic terms for archaeology, so they have a saf, kind of a Ford factory line. So standing in a saf made the task speedier and more manageable, especially for the Bedu, who were hauling stones away. The workers' coping strategies included wearing head coverings, loose clothing, and retreating to the shade during the afternoon hours. Their coping mechanisms also must have included oral beginning of work prayer formulas. So you would hear them saying Bismillah at the beginning of work in the name of God. And they also would issue oral petitions for ease. Those are known as du'as in Arabic. One of these du'as or petitions for ease that is known as the Rabb Yasir prayer ornaments the truck's door as a calligraphic roundel. So here's our dump truck, and it's got a calligraphy on the door, and that says Rabb Yasir right there. The full petition goes as follows, quote, "O Lord, make it easy. Do not make it difficult. O Lord, make it end well." And here's the Arabic. So Rabb Yasir is, "O Lord, make it easy." Like rain prayers that aim to secure agricultural fertility and abundance, the Rabbi Yasir petition belongs to a larger corpus of Islamic prayers that help individuals sustain vegetal and animal life, as well as to find strength in challenge and comfort in adversity. So it's very appropriate for an archaeological site in the steppe. Like the local Syrian workers, the team of foreign scholars excavators also sought out coolness during the afternoon hours and evenings. They retreated to the dig house, known affectionately as Beit Michigan or Michigan House, a structure built with locally available materials, including adobe and wooden beams. The individual rooms were essentially beehive huts, a type of vernacular architecture that resembles a primordial canopy. Pervasive throughout the region, including at the centuries-old Upper Mesopotamian city of Haran, these domical homes are not only environmentally sensitive, but through their tapered form and mud walls, also provide an effective cooling system for their dwellers. So here I show you a historical photograph from 1914 of Haran. This is the beehive hut village with an Umayyad period mosque and a minaret in the background. Here is Renata Khalid at the beehive hut of Qasr al-Hayr. And here, just for fun, is me, myself, and I at Haran some years ago. Gruber and his colleagues must have favored this historical building tradition at Qasr al-Hayr for a number of reasons, above all, its ease of construction and hence moderate cost. However, one should not fail to spotlight their eco-friendly attributes as well. Erected one day, these structures can be unbuilt the next, leaving no unsightly concrete, steel, aluminum, glass, or plastic rubble to waste in their wake. While beehive homes comprise an indigenous form of architecture for relatively sedentarized communities, tents are the nomad's abode par excellence. They can be carried on camel or donkey back, pitched and unpitched swiftly and easily, as individuals, family units, and tribes migrate from one place to the next or between summer and winter pastures. At Qasr al-Hayr, while the local workers at At-Tayyiba and As-Sukhna commuted to work, the Spa tribesmen erected tents close to the dig site. As Khalid recalls, these Bedu had two types of tents, of darkly colored wool for the winter season and of lightly colored wool and cotton blend for the spring and summer. These two types of tents, so white and black, are clearly discernible in the background of this photograph. What appears in its foreground, however, piques one's interest. Here, a rectangular structure is outlined in stones cobbled together outside of the ruined walls of the archaeological site, with an open entryway that leads axially to a well-articulated niche. So here is the entryway, and here is a niche made of pebbled stones. Those who have studied the basics of Islamic architecture will be quick to decipher the key elements of a mosque. In particular, the mihrab concavity, right here, marking the Qibla wall that guides worshippers in congregational prayer towards Mecca. For their part, the upright stones at the four corners of the rectangular outline allude to minarets, here, 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 and here, while the entryways, lateral stones, right here, may index a monumental entrance. This lapidary frame thus sketches an Arab hypostyle mosque as an architectonic foundation for the Muslim community, working and also praying together at Qasr al-Hayr. Much like the nearby tents, this seasonal eco-mosque could be disbanded at the end of an excavation season, or at will, by simply scattering its stones hither and there. While one might assume primarily a Bedouin agency or use, this stone mosque also catered to the local workmen who used this primordial structure to carry out their daily devotions. Indeed, the midday congregational prayer formed part of a break that stretched between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. and included lunch and afternoon rest. However, since the local workmen returned to their villages on Thursday evenings for the weekend, which is Friday and Saturday in the Middle East, only the Bedouin remained on site. It is they who utilize the mosque for the Friday noontime communal prayer, which is the major prayer of the week, transforming this humble ground plan into a fully fledged Friday mosque or jami. Not merely an open space for prayer or a prayer station, the pebbled jami at Qasr al-Hayr catalyzes a host of questions about the religious architecture of Islam, including what types of structures allow Muslim men and women to pray together, especially when they are on the move. In its form and materials, this short, thick-set edifice highlights the leveraging of stopgap measures in architectural practice, one of whose outcomes could be called the makeshift eco-mosque. Just like Beit Michigan, the woolen tents, and the stone mosque, Qasr al-Hayr's summer weather came and went. The Badia hosted not only burning temperatures, stinging scorpions, and cute bunnies, but also the most awesome climactic events in the shape of the Asifa dust storm. In a May 1966 letter to George Forsyth, Gruber describes the Asifa with these powerful words, quote, "We have just been subjected to one of the most frightening and spectacular sights of desert life, a huge dust storm which simply changed day into night for a few hours and literally engulfed us." Renata Hollett, too, has much to say about the Asifa dust storm. And in fact, Michelle and I recorded her words, and here I'd like to try to see if the recording will play for us. It's just 2 minutes or so. Maybe not. I don't think the audio is working, so I will quote her instead. She says that, here we go. There we go. She says that you could see the Asifa in the distance as a wall that literally goes up and blocks out the sun. It becomes completely dark in the middle of the day. It blew down every single tent. Everything was covered in red dust. It could last an entire day, causing total panic as the middle of the day turned into night, end quote. Hollett goes on to say that while she, Gruber, and others would run to seek shelter in the dig house, Andreg, the intrepid storm chaser, sprinted in the opposite direction whenever a storm came their way. It is this photographic punctum, or suspense moment, to borrow Roland Barthes' expression, which shows Gruber standing next to two workers and a white tent as he looks back to the pinkish wall of dust rolling his way, that is immortalized in what I think is one of the most dramatic shots at Qasr al-Hayr. So here is Oleg looking back on the dust wall with the workers and the tent right here. Acting as a prosthetic device, the picture is aesthetically breathtaking as well as redolent with a nostalgia that had yet to set in. Ah, there we go, it's playing.
You could see it in the distance as a wall that literally goes up, and then at some point it just blocks out the sun and it's completely dark. And this is in the middle of the day. And then it blew down every single tent that the Bedouin had. Wow. And then finally it blew over, and everything was covered with a very fine dust, red dust.
How long did it last?
Pretty well, the whole, the entire day. I mean, you could, the panic was just unbelievable.
But the Bedouins had never seen something like this, or very?
No, they had seen some, they knew, first of all, yes, because they knew the name. I mean, Asipa, like.
But Asipa just means like storm.
But for them, that was what it was.
Like,
Yeah.
okay.
So it could last the entire day. And tell us about the panic. You said that the panic was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because it was all consuming.
No, and it's completely black. I mean, you like, it simply becomes night in the middle of the day. And then there is a huge wind, and of course it blows over.
So I'm glad we got to hear Renata. So let me just bring us full circle here with some concluding thoughts. Digging below the archaeological photography at Qasr al-Hayr uncovers the beauties and difficulties of life and work on one particular dig that brought together a miscellany of individuals in the Badia during the late 1960s and early 1970s. At this moment in time, Bedouin life carried on in new ways, even though tribes like the Saba started to disperse, settle, and integrate into the villages and cities of Syria. Foreign scholars, including Gruber and Khalid, also embraced the rhythm of transhumance, shifting their summer labors from their American offices to the arid lands of the Middle East. Brought together under the occasional circumstance of excavation work, a new community emerged, unearthing a historical site and creating its own habitus along the way. Unlike the material remains of the dig, the short-lived culture of the Qasr al-Hayr expedition carries on embedded in individual memories, as well as ennobled in Andreg's photographs. Visually freezing a moment and place in time, these images craft their own archaeological effects. Scholars and workers labored, pondered, laughed, argued, got stung, contracted illnesses, and sang love songs in this Umayyad urban entity located somewhere between the desert and the Saône. The Kelsey Museum's photographs capture these interwoven peoples and places, offering us a window into an entire life world that has since vanished. Each image, however, is not merely a momentary light exposure developed in a darkroom. Rather, beneath its surface are layers of sedimented stories that require digging, exhuming, and explaining, in other words, of archaeological labor itself. As an alternative site for understanding the past, both remote and recent, the photos of Qasr al-Hayr remind us that even in the midst of a scientific endeavor, man remains the measure of all things. Perhaps then 1,000 cliques are precisely what was needed, though Gruber knew not at first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gruber. Now we'll go ahead and stop recording and we can move on to the Q&A.